let me thank you for being. Let me thank you guys for being on this morning. Sorry that some of you had a problem getting on. However, do remind us to give that number just in case there are others who are able to get on later on as an alternate number, as an alternate calling number, rather. Are there any questions from anything that we talked about last Monday or last Sunday or Monday? Last Sunday or Saturday, please. Any questions? Any comments?
Yeah, I have a comment, but it won't happen till tomorrow. Have you all heard of this? There's going to be some sort of religious commercials at the Super Bowl tomorrow.
I heard about that, but I didn't get the gist of it.
I haven't seen the commercials, but I'm interested as to what they're actually going to display, because I think that is indicative of the fact that they know their brand is not doing very well.
Yes. And when I heard about it, someone told me, and I'm like, why? And then it dawned on me, it's probably Southern Baptist trying to reach the kids. But that's going to be interesting. That's going to be interesting. Anyone else have any comment or question about anything? It doesn't have to be what we discussed.
Just a note, I just saw, if you Google Christian commercial at Super Bowl on YouTube, you'll come up with a 2-minute and 32-second. I think it's the ad. I don't know, I haven't opened it, but there you go.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Anyone else? Nick, do you have, you want to go ahead and recap and see if there are questions or comments from what you talked about?
Sure. So I believe last week I left off with a couple things, but we talked about the symbolism of the serpent being raised up in the desert by Moses. And then in the New Testament, where it says the Son of Man shall also be lifted up, as Moses lifted the serpent up. And we talked about the connection between that and the sort of inner spiritual fire that, if directed towards spiritual things and towards the process of investigating the self, is how that serpent is raised up through the energy centers that make up the self. And we talked about the connection between that concept as it is presented in the Bible and the Eastern spiritual traditions and the Kundalini serpent, and the process of raising the Kundalini serpent during meditation and spiritual practice as it is described in those traditions. So all those things are connected. The Bible makes frequent reference to these, I would say, fundamental spiritual and metaphysical aspects of ourselves, although they have been obscured on purpose, as well as just generally more veiled in the way that these concepts have been translated through the Europeans who interpreted them. And there's a lot more stuff like that in the Bible and in the books of the Bible that are not included in the traditional Western Christian version of this collection of stories, allegories, metaphysical, historical truth, etc. So if there's no questions or anything about what we talked about last time, I wanted to continue from that point. And
I have a question.
yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. So when Jesus was feeding the multitude, was he teaching us then how to meditate at that time? How to go within ourselves and to, how to go within ourselves and to connect with the universe?
all teachings are about how to go within ourselves and connect with the universe. But yes, the point of all of the parables and the tools that would have been used in teaching would be to direct you to an aspect of the spiritual nature of the self. And that would have been done directly with probably some of the closer disciples, and much more indirectly in the forms of parables, etc., for people in general. But the purpose was always to teach about the nature of the self and how to handle the various challenges that we face here in the material experience, and how they are all reflections of what our own ego or whatever aspect of ourselves need to be challenged in order to grow.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, because I remember I would hear a long time ago that Jesus was a yogi. And I'm like, oh, come on. Jesus a yogi? From what religion teaches us, it was not. That's not the understanding that I got. But yeah, now I see the more we talk about this, the more clearer things are coming. Thank you.
Thank you. And according to the legends, which you can read in a few different places, but one book is the Aquarian Gospel. The Aquarian Gospel, and it's probably hinted at in other books that are not generally included, but the legends concerning the youth of Jesus state that he traveled to all kinds of places, including India, and I'm quite sure he would have been aware of these kinds of concepts. And as we've sort of mentioned last week, raising the serpent on the cross has a lot of sort of metaphysical and symbolic meaning. But what is presented in the Bible as sort of spiritual truth in terms of raising the serpent up in the desert or raising the Son of Man up was inverted in a way in the physical crucifixion of Yeshua. If that did happen, and I believe it did, but it was in the same way that religious thinking and ego is responsible for attempting to physicalize and control and essentially degrade and destroy spiritual concepts and spiritual truth. That same process happened when Yeshua was physically crucified.
Question.
Yes.
So the worshiping of Jesus, like on the cross, and the making of that into an icon, that's basically to sort of control and keep people focused on his death rather than focusing on resurrecting their own truth.
Absolutely. And whether or not that's done sort of consciously by the people who use these symbols at the, I don't know, high levels, quote unquote, of the church authority in the Vatican, I mean, it doesn't matter. That's the effect that it has. That is just idol worship in the sense that it is the directing of attention towards literal physical objects, as opposed to directing that attention towards inner spiritual experience. And it has that effect. If you can, if you can turn something into a symbol, it can then be manipulated, that symbol, which is why you have to be careful your understanding of symbolism and your use of anything in that regard. Yes.
In regards to the symbolism and how it was used, I think one of the things we need to remind ourselves of is that the only one who believes that there is quote unquote church in the earth are the people that believe what the Vatican said. Because the Vatican was never intended, or it has never been a church, it's always been a nation state. And everyone who embraces Christianity is a part of that nation state, whether they like it or not. What do I mean by that? Everyone who embraces Christianity came from the root of the Vatican. And the Vatican is a nation state because it has its own flag, it has its own coins, money, it has its ambassadors everywhere in the world, plus the world sent ambassadors to the Vatican. It's not so much Vatican City as a Vatican or Catholic state. And the idea of Christianity is not to undergird a church. What it is a present ideology of a nation state, which is the Vatican. And if you really think about it, when you look at that, you begin to see that the Vatican is the one who controls the ideology of the Vatican, which is Christianity, no different than American and Europeans defend their ideology, which is basically capitalism. So let's keep in mind that this idea of a church came from the Vatican, and the nature of that is foreign to the scriptures. Thank you.
Thank you. So whenever you see the
Sorry,
physical,
Nick.
oh, go ahead.
I stopped before I finished. Therefore, when we look at the symbols that are put forth by the Vatican, whether it's the communion table or Jesus on the cross, all of these symbols are designed to keep us in line, and as Nick said, they're manipulated to make sure that we adhere to this ideological concept of the Vatican policy, which is actually something that is below the purpose of it. The purpose is a nation state, but this ideology is there to undergird the nation state. Thank you.
Thank you. And the Vatican and the whole power structure behind that is well aware of the tools that it is employing and for the purpose that they are using them. The Vatican itself has, these people have an Egyptian obelisk in the middle of their big courtyard for a reason. Like, they know what it is. And they have all kinds of symbols that they pull from Egypt in particular, and probably other places around the world, but they have them there because they understand what they mean. In particular, well, one of the things that they have there is the symbol of the Egyptian stone coffin with no lid, as well as the I forget exactly what they're called, Bennu birds, or essentially the phoenix birds from Egyptian mythology as well. And the coffin without a lid is similar to what would have been found in the Great Pyramid. And I think that's that stone coffin, quote unquote coffin, without a lid is still there in the pyramid, but they have that same concept, that same statue on the Vatican grounds because they know what it is they're talking about. And their purpose is not to have people seek any of the inner truth or meaning of what those things are, but rather to bring them under their umbrella and use them for the exact same purpose that Pastor Richard is talking about, is just maintaining control of the nation state of belief that Christianity is.
There's also that that it kind of looks like a pine cone, but it's a symbol of the pineal gland that they have right there in the Vatican courtyard too.
Yep. They are well aware of all of these symbols. And they
So Nick, since you mentioned it, I'm sorry.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I was gonna ask you then, what's the meaning of the casket without the lid?
The casket without the lid is the transcending death. And that is what happens after a certain point of spiritual development. You no longer have the need to experience physical death. And more symbolically, it is the transcendence of the need to engage the process of the cycles of reincarnation for the purpose of learning from this material physical experience. And the one of the ways to describe the ultimate purpose of what we are learning from this physical material experience is to learn how to stop recreating those conditions that produce death spiritually and then therefore physically. So even that old phrase that we're all familiar with, the wages of sin is death, it's true. Obviously, religiously, that has a slightly different meaning, but the out of balance, out of alignment state that our ignorance, our egoism, etc., produces is what creates the conditions that allow for death physically and spiritually first, and then therefore physically.
First of all, was that clear? Want to say anything? Huh?
That was a lot, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's clear, but I would like a little bit more, and to elaborate a little bit more on that. Please.
Go ahead, Nick.
Sure. So, as I was mentioning, the coffin without a lid is a statue, something that is on the grounds of the Vatican, but it originally comes from the Great Pyramid, because the Great Pyramid is a let's call it a meditation temple. It's definitely not a tomb, but the coffin without a lid is where you would lay in the Great Pyramid, and you would essentially take advantage of the resonance properties of the pyramid and the way it was constructed. And it is said, according to legend, I need to find some better sources, but either Napoleon or some European made it in there and laid in the coffin and then had like a horrible experience in terms of the sort of visionary properties of that meditative place. But in any case, the pyramid is itself not functioning to the same degree that it used to, although those properties are still there. But that was the purpose of that sort of coffin without a lid. It was the focal point.
While you were talking, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just said it was
I apologize.
I just said it was a focal point. But go ahead, I'm done.
While you're talking, I saw elevation. It's a symbol also of elevating, you leaving the body, the physical body, and I see it as an ascension, so to speak. Am I right about that?
I see it like pretty much the same, but maybe a different order in that when you die, it's simply saying your death is not like a normal death where you have to be buried in the ground. It's saying that you don't die, period. that you are elevated to the spiritual realm, or you are elevated from the space as was Enoch. You learned all you could, and now your body, you no longer need your material body, and you move from it. The pyramid, as Nick said, was never intended to be a quote-unquote cemetery. The pyramid houses amazing energy. There have been instances where people put dull razor blades or dull knife in the temple and left it overnight, and it was sharper the next morning. Half-ripe fruit has been put in those pyramids, and it was ripened the next day. So those are kinds of energy that's there. Now keep in mind, the very people who utilize these energies and know what they mean are the very people who tells you you're going to hell. If you believe that a pineal gland is real, you're going to hell. If you think that you can be elevated without being without dying and going to heaven. All of these things have been put out there to minimize our journey to spirituality. The most dangerous part of it is the church itself. The church itself has been told you've got to have the communion table, and it doesn't matter whether you're Baptist, Methodist, whatever. You got to have the cross. And why is it that a symbol of death has become the primary focus of a celebration during what we call Easter? This is not a period of resurrection. This is a period of crucifixion. And if it were celebrating our life, then it would not be a cross. It would be an ankh. And an ankh is a cross that's open at the top like an oval. So everything that has power, every energy source that has been given to humanity has been usurped by the European, especially Christianity, and they've attempted to use it for their purposes. So if it was not powerful, then how in the world did it get to the place where we are subjugated to it and don't even realize it? We are the subjects of the Vatican, and anything that's not subject to the Vatican is a pagan religion, i.e. Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. Everything that's not Christianity is a pagan religion according to the Vatican. But yet, the Vatican utilizes every symbol it tells you to stay away from. Thank you. Questions or comments? If there are none, you.
Yep. And the development of the concept of hell that we are so familiar with did not even occur until the sort of imperial Christianity that projected itself all over the world started to become the main focus of the political and social body that Christianity was in Europe at the time. It was not until they needed a method of, or better method, a more efficient method of keeping their sort of mental, social, and physical empire together that we see this concept of hell as we are more familiar with it today. In the beginning, there barely was even a concept that you would face torment after you died. That didn't happen until centuries later, after Jesus' death, for sure. But its perfection, that concept, is in evangelical Christianity in America, because even the stuffy, uptight Christianity of the Vatican and Europeans is somehow less conservative than the version of America. American Christianity, evangelical Christianity in particular, and on top of that, the sort of prosperity gospel flavor of in evangelical Christianity is in my opinion, the perfected version of Christianity that is the component of capitalism that requires mental control, that is designed to essentially mentally enslave.
And seemingly people believe things like Dante's Inferno, is his interpretation of hell, much more. They're more gullible to believe that than they are to believe the truths of spirituality.
Yeah, it just resonates with a more mundane experience. We all experience negative things. So it translates into that concept very easily. And all of those people during the Renaissance were more informed, wiser, and more intelligent than the church officials who employed them. All of them. Dante's whole thing is called what? The Divine Comedy. In part because it is a joke. The word comedy doesn't exactly mean the same thing, but they were well aware of what they were being asked to do for the most part. And of course, that doesn't mean they didn't personally believe in the concept of hell. I'm sure Dante did, but the sort of Renaissance people of Europe who sort of put modern Europe together in a way were generally speaking on a higher level than the church officials who gave them money. But anyway, over here in America, where people who were somehow even too uptight for Europeans left and came, the version of Christianity that we have is it's just the pure, uncut, brain dead religiosity, if I can make that word up, of Christianity. It is without thought, because if you think, then you start asking questions, and you can't ask questions because guess what? You're going to go to hell. And the icons and physical tools like Jesus on the cross, etc., are all part of that sort of ritualistic, mental and spiritual and emotional ensnarement for the purpose of ultimately just getting your money, essentially. Which is, of course, just more power. Now, I mentioned, I forget how long ago, but does everyone know of that bull statue that sits outside of Wall Street or on Wall Street? That is in modern times, the golden calf of religious ignorance. That was mentioned in the New Testament, or in the Old Testament, just sort of recreated. And I think there's more to it than that, because there's probably a variety of secret societies and their descendants weaved into our, quote, elite groups of people and their sort of willingness and desire to dominate our financial system. But anyway, the golden calf, that bull sitting on Wall Street, and the sort of physical images of Jesus on the cross all play a similar role, and are all on the same sort of level. They are attempts to create physical symbols for the purposes of capturing attention and diverting attention away from the truth concerning what is actually occurring within us spiritually and amongst us socially, etc.
Nick?
Mhm.
This is, excuse me, this is Janice.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask you,
while you were talking about symbols that capture attention, one of the things that reminds me of is the Matrix and how people were stacked and essentially used as batteries to power the machines in sort of the real world, right? After Neo escapes from this sort of artificial reality that's been created to keep all of the humans quiet and producing energy. I've also seen that in another movie, which is really wacky, but the humans were sort of being harvested every so often for a substance that would keep people young. But
yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
wondering, yeah, I can't
Jupiter
remember the name of the
Ascending.
movie. Yes, I love that movie. I think it's really beautiful and a lot of fun. But anyway, like this is something that I see like in science fiction, and I feel like it's connected to what you're talking about because the people that you mentioned as elites take these symbols and they can draw our attention and manipulate it in some way. Is that right? And if so, can you talk a little bit about that?
I believe it is. And yeah, let me just, did everyone get that? Does everyone need clarification on sort of what we're
Hey,
mentioning?
Nick,
Yep. Hey.
and can you add to that the green lights that we're seeing, like the matrix lights? I think it was in Asia. They think it was a Chinese satellite, but it's the same idea, I think, too, of what you're talking about.
May I interject something? Because there are some people who probably have not seen the Matrix and is unaware of what you're referencing. When I think about the Matrix, I think about it in very simplistic terms, as the energy of humans was used to power the Matrix. I see that in reality as the energy of humans who are being used to power the energy of the economic system. That is the purpose of keeping people at low wages, so that the people who are in the positions of power and wealth can continue to function as they choose to function. That comparison is what I see in terms of the Matrix powering the machinery that controls everything. It hasn't changed. The Matrix is just a takeoff from what the reality of that is. If you think about that even deeper, you will see that it took the energy of the African in order to build the financial stability or the financial power of this nation, and that same energy is being reproduced simply in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. 100% agree. And I think when if you've ever seen that Charlie Chaplin movie, The Great Dictator, I think that's what it was.
No, I haven't.
But you can find clips of it on YouTube, but basically he is it's pretty good, but it's he describes machine men with machine hearts in reference to I think at the time the Nazis, but anybody on that wavelength. And there's a reason he used that terminology. Machine men with machine hearts. There's a reason that the Germans are considered some of the best sort of engineers in the world when it comes to machining. Those things are all connected, and what it stems from is the nature of the the spiritual atrophy that has occurred within this social group in general in certain ways. It is a pattern of thought that results from disconnection from empathy, from disconnection from the reality of spiritual experience. In the absence of that connection, or at very least if it's not dominant, if it's just a tiny little voice that you ignore on a collective level, what you tend to do is you move away from what we would consider organic, empathetic, more human ways of behaving towards more inorganic, more machine-like, more purely intellectually driven kinds of behavior and thought patterns. And that has the tendency to be much more destructive for obvious reasons. But it is this whole mythology that we keep recreating, that we keep describing in stories like The Matrix, in stories like Jupiter Ascending, are very much our sort of symbolic recreation of what we know to be spiritual truth. And there's more literal truth in those movies that I believe is the case based on concepts and personal experience. But I don't want to go too far just in this conversation. There are these mentalities that we have to deal with spiritually in order to heal them. And so that overly intellectual, machine-like consciousness is not something that dominates the earth, because if it does, it creates self-destruction, sort of globally or collectively, while the individuals who are in control of that system are in pursuit of their own egotistical desire, essentially. What we see...
Nick, I have a question. I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, let me stop there and ask, actually, if there's questions. Go ahead.
Based on, I have not seen The Matrix, but based on what you and Pastor are describing, is that why we're seeing this big push now for man to create the artificial intelligence? Because
yes, ma'am.
We're having problems with that on college campuses. Everywhere you turn now, it's AI, AI. How does that fit into everything you're saying?
Yes, ma'am. The need that people have to recreate some version of AI is essentially the material. If you think of materialism as a religion, that is the need to create the god of that religion. And it actually, the sort of need to do that comes from an instinctual, though very weak, connection to spirit and the need to know the true nature of the self and thus the creator in reality. But disconnected from that and sort of not even understanding what that is or having any context for the reality of that, they attempt to recreate that same thing, but in the physical. And if all you believe is, well, if you believe that this material experience is all there is, then the sort of ultimate master of that material experience is some version of AI. It just handles all the material stuff. It solves any intellectual problem as it relates to our material experience, is the idea. Now, there's a lot to that, because what we produce culturally, what we produce in society is a reflection of our spiritual state, is a reflection of what is in us. That isn't necessarily a bad thing in concept, the idea of computers and AI, etc. If anything, the AI doing everything for us is just another indication that this sort of system we live under, capitalism, is very much lying to us about the state of the world and where it could be. Like, we could handle all of the things humanity doesn't want to do with robots, essentially, and then use the surplus to give us more leisure time, more ability to connect with each other, etc. That is the benefit of those kinds of tools. That won't happen until the pervading egoism of the system, generally we would know it as capitalism, is essentially destroyed, or transformed is a better word. As long as that egoism, as long as that disconnection from spirit is the dominant force within any system, it will become more machine-like in its approach to everything that is not it. And the machine must take everything apart in its doomed quest to understand, because it can't understand. But it doesn't realize that the reasons it can't. And so that is in part what is represented by movies like The Matrix, and is that consciousness that we have to stop within ourselves and transform if we want to prevent our own self-destruction.
So in essence, the mechanization of this world is a conscious effort to create a God for the benefit of those who see themselves as a God, and bring into existence these types of intelligence for their benefit and for the control of everyone else. Is that it?
Absolutely.
Therefore, so when I was in Lowe's one day, and there were no individuals at the cash register, even though they are there. Either you use the checkout, self-checkout, or you don't buy anything. And that is a minimal part of this whole idea of the influx of AI. When I say minimal, that's just the beginning. That's then a step forward with that. I see this also as an opportunity, as you said in the beginning, or if it's used in the right manner, it could be beneficial to all of humanity. However, there is no desire at this point to make it beneficial to humanity. The desire at this point is to get rid of all wage earners and to increase profit, because you don't have to pay anybody to do the work. And to show how deeply invested the wealthy and the society is in those things, I did not know that until actually last night, I think it was, I did not know that at a McDonald's you sign a non-compete agreement, so you can't go across the street to Burger King and get a job simply because they pay more. I did not know that kind of non-compete contract existed until last night, which speaks again to the depth of desire for profit above people. Thank you. Unless there are questions to come in. Am I right, Nick?
Oh yes, I believe so. That they are, well, let me just mention, they are trying to get robots and AI up and running, because then they can cut off all the lowly workers who they had to depend on for all this time. I'm done.
So is the AI then the new, like, golden calf?
In a way, I would, it's probably another, it might be Baal, or I don't know what the spiritually symbolic equivalent as it is described in the Old Testament would be, but the golden calf is a bit more tangible. The AI would be more of like a it's something else, but yeah, it's on that spectrum.
Okay, so our disconnection with I mean, in general, humankind, our disconnection with spirit makes us more machine-like and makes us more dependent on things like AI in terms of facilitating our knowledge, plus making us seem more knowledgeable in general because we have access to whatever, but it's all but it's still all, I don't know, handicapping us in terms of our own spiritual growth.
Yes, it's absolutely handicapping us. Just think about it. Like if you lack empathy, if you lack sort of the intuitive ability to understand or know yourself and other people, if you lack that sort of social desire to learn and connect, you will rely more heavily on your intellect as the means of interface, as your method and tool that you use to understand everything. And the intellect is by nature more like a machine. It is analytical. It takes all the parts apart in order to understand a thing. But it is lacking in its ability to know the wholeness or the reality of the thing. It can only ever describe a thing in a secondhand sort of way. It cannot know directly. And so when the sort of our intuitive, empathetic, spiritual awareness is sort of atrophied to the point where we don't even realize we have it, it essentially drives us crazy because that is a instinctual thing that we need to connect with. But if all we have is the intellect and whatever it does, we can only sort of describe or understand in a secondhand way. We cannot interface with directly, which is a function of, which is what we call knowledge, is the spiritual capacity and ability to know a thing, is to interface with that thing. So if all you have is intellect, it essentially drives you insane, and you will attempt to recreate, as we've just been talking about, that sort of instinctually remembered actual connection, but it will fail.
Nick, I wanted to make one other observation too. We often talk about how sometimes Hollywood gets it right and sees things that we haven't seen yet. But as these new movies are coming out about AI, they keep showing how, left to their own devices, eventually man will lose control of AI and AI takes over. And everything that you're describing, when you're just intellectual with no empathy, no sympathy, no feelings for humanity whatsoever, then you begin to destroy the very thing that created you. And I just wonder, as I look at everything, if there were not a man in the earth seeking to bring balance and bring humanity to a place of oneness, this could be the catalyst for the very thing that would destroy humanity and the very people that, created it. And I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you. I believe that is correct. And that's sort of why we instinctually automatically say, are the robots going to eventually destroy us? Because yes.
I see that on the spiritual plane as well, and that is the idea of AI being the dominant source of quote-unquote intellect, or being created by intellect. Is that not, as Kathy was talking about, the thing that created it being destroyed? Is this not an effort by those who have no empathy, by those who only see mechanisms as not being totally different than spirituality? Is this not making an attempt to destroy the thing that created you in terms of mankind seek and destroy the God that created them, and that is the reason it's going to fail, because this is about bringing into existence your own God, and that in itself destroys you, if not physically, certainly destroys you emotionally and intellectually. I've thought about the IBM computer that was on Jeopardy some years ago, and how quickly it processed, and that in itself showed that showed the mechanization of thought. So is that not the thing that we're headed to? And if that is so, then the failure is based, whether or not it fails or dominates, is dependent upon those who have an understanding of who they are, not only sympathetically, but who they are in terms of being God. If we don't see that God exists and that's who we are, then these machines become God to the earth. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
The other part of that too, Pastor, is I've read these articles about how any preliminary AI development, and when they put it to the test, the AI itself takes on aspects of the people who are developing it, and it takes on their perspective. So a lot of these AI programs are inherently racist. So you get that on top of it all, because the AI is picking up all these biases and racism from the people who are developing it.
And that is
Mhm.
that's why cameras have trouble distinguishing between Black people, because those biases, you know how cameras have facial recognition, those biases are built into the software, and the software isn't trained in a neutral way. So yeah, I agree with you, Audrey. It's like this weird, crazy snowball effect.
Yeah, it'd be super thankful that that Black people have like a sort of inherent ability to avoid and sort of escape the effects of this like machine like spider web. But anyway, let me give another example of how this sort of idea or these spiritual concepts are presenting themselves in our culture, and then connect that back to something in the Bible. This sort of inherent need to reconnect with empathy, with spirit, with the natural world, in order to stop that machine-like intellectual ignorance from triggering some sort of self-destruction, is very much something we culturally in America are aware of, even if we don't realize it. James Cameron and the movies, the Avatar movies, the tall blue people, are very much a reflection of this sort of subconscious understanding that we must return to a more spiritually empathetic, sort of natural based way of living and understanding. And that's not to say we can't use technology, but the point is we cannot be used by technology. James Cameron is very much instinctually aware of this. And that's why I made the statement that he is in some way the director of the age of Aquarius. And you can find symbolism to that effect, even less than the super obvious stuff in those movies, across all those movies. In the first Avatar movie, one of the you know how on airplanes and stuff like that, they would paint symbols and give them names and things like that in the military. In the first Avatar movie, one of the main sort of I think they were helicopters or something, but one of the main vehicles that they were using was called Papa Dragon. It was referred to as a dragon. So I will connect that to the concept of the dragon as it is presented in the book of Revelation. But James Cameron is instinctually aware of this need to return collectively and instinctually to this more, as I've said, natural, empathetic, intuitive way of being. James Cameron has always loved the ocean, and his affinity for the natural environment is what keeps his connection to this instinctual knowledge alive. And it is essentially what it informs him, what informs his creativity. Now, think about the movies that James Cameron has made. All good movies. Terminator 2, Aliens. It is all about the things that are coming to kill you when you disregard the need to respect spirit. I'm pretty sure he's an atheist, but it doesn't matter. These are instinctual truths being remembered as a result of direct experience with the natural world. In James Cameron's case, being in the ocean all the time. And the Avatar series is, I believe, his culminating symbolic retelling of this need. And that's why he's making 5 of these movies or whatever. So I present that as an example of our collective understanding of all of these things. Avatar is one of the most, weirdly enough, we seem to not really talk about it unless we're in the movie watching it in terms of sort of culturally. But the point is, it is a direct reflection of what we all sort of are collectively aware of on a spiritual level. Now, I mentioned one of the symbols presented in the first Avatar movie was the dragon. That was the flying machine that destroyed the home of the native people in that movie. And the dragon, as it is mentioned in the book of Revelations or anywhere else that is mentioned, is the same energy of the serpent as I've been speaking about it. But it is the sort of out of control amplification of the negative aspects of the energy represented by the serpent. It is the supreme self-worship in the egotistical sense. And it always brings destruction, self-destruction, destruction of our collective environment, etc. And in the book of Revelations, the dragon is cast down. That is the process by which you, raising up the serpent, dealing with the sort of ego challenges, etc., that you encounter as you engage this process of enlightenment, this process of spiritual growth, represented again in the book of Revelations by 7 churches, 7 lampstands, etc. Connect that to the concept of the chakras, which we've spoken about before. And that is what casts the dragon back down. That is what transforms the nature of the energy from an ego, sort of intellectually negative form, into one that generates spiritual insight, light, awareness, connectedness, and knowledge, etc. Questions or comments, if any? Does that make sense?
I have a question. I'm sorry, how are you?
Oh, did somebody? I only heard you.
And it does, that's all.
Oh, okay. As far as the serpent rising, in the Kundalini, what makes that energy rise? What causes it to rise?
Good question. Trust me, it wants to by itself. The thing that facilitates that energy rising is us sort of dealing with the challenges we face on a day-to-day basis across our entire lives and learning how to grow as a result of facing them. Quite simply. The second thing that allows that energy to rise is a sort of conscious knowledge that it is a spiritual process, and then sort of directing our attention, etc., internally towards that process. So indirectly, as we go through life and face whatever it is, if we learn how to learn from those challenges, etc., we learn how to deal with our egos, we learn how to address various aspects of ourself that we realize need to be addressed, it will rise. To then do all of that, but also with the conscious recognition that is a spiritual process, and then with the conscious engagement of things like active meditation and things like that, then it rises much more quickly.
But it seems to all come back down to the basis of desire. If this is what I desire to do, then I can begin to move in that direction. But if I have no desire to do that, if I'm machinistic, if I'm a machine, I see money as my God, and I'm selfish, I have no desire to seek enlightenment, because in seeking that, I have to understand the unicity and the oneness of us all. And that is not what I see if I desire to dominate. If that's my goal, to dominate other people and their resources. So the basic thing is all based in our desire to want to seek that path, seemingly.
Yes, thank you. And let me add to that. If the desire is egotistical, that is how the dragon is constructed. That is how the dragon takes form. And you can see this represented in our popular culture in a way, like in stories like Lord of the Rings, etc. Dragons are always associated with gold and wanting to hoard physical material items. It's very much a sort of symbolic representation of the same concept. All of what we produce on a cultural level,
I'm sorry.
all of what we produce on a cultural level is reflective of these, are remembering these spiritual concepts. Go ahead, I'm done.
So like DJ just said, set your desire. Well, desire this to happen. And then like you had written on the board, it's set your intent and just be. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I've always wondered, how does that energy goes up? And now that you guys are talking about it, I have a better meaning of meditation, because we taught to make this thing happen, try to make it happen, instead of just sitting and desiring and just be. And I know you guys have taught, all the teachers, you guys have talked about that previously, but now that we're talking it out again, I'm getting the gist of it. I'm getting it now. I'm getting it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. And I can give another example of this. As I mentioned, as we go through life, if our desire is balanced, if our desire is directed internally and away from a sort of selfish version of our ego, then that energy sort of rises as the process of spiritual growth and essentially enlightenment happens. Then when we consciously engage that process in something like meditation, which we do all the time, but more focused meditation, then it happens more quickly. So for example, when you meditate, you sit in observation of your own self. So you explore your inner environment. Why do I believe what I believe? Why do I feel what I feel? Where do my beliefs, thoughts, feelings, etc. come from within me, within my experience of conscious awareness? When you investigate the origin and the source of your thoughts, feelings, etc., you can identify more clearly those things that block the energy from being balanced. And when you learn to balance or heal whatever it is you identify that you need to balance or heal, that is when that serpent energy, the gates are pushed aside that much more quickly for it. And that's, I think, a good way to describe how this process works. There's much more to it, and much more that I don't understand, but much more I do understand that I think is difficult to explain. But the basic mechanism is being aware of yourself in any situation you face during your normal life, and also when you are sort of more purposefully introspecting within yourself. Be aware of what it is you think and feel, why you think and feel it, where it comes from. And then there's sort of more to that inner exploration. But the balancing and the healing is what allows that energy to rise that much more quickly. When it says the Son of Man must be lifted up, Son of Man is not a reference to Jesus specifically as he states it, or as he is called that in the Bible. I was looking this up a bit earlier. Son of Man kind of depends on whether you're saying it in Hebrew or Aramaic, but it's similar. It basically just means person. The nature of the human person. The humanity and the essence of what that is in your conscious awareness, in your spirit, must be raised up in order to achieve salvation. Because, as I said before, that verse where Jesus says the Son of Man must be lifted up comes right before. Everybody's famous, the one we all know. And so he gave his only begotten Son. That is the process by which salvation is achieved. As I mentioned before, it is salvation from the products of ignorance, ego, etc., and the hellish conditions that living in a state of ignorance, selfish ego, etc., produces. And eventually, it is also salvation from the experience of death, both physically, because physical experience is a projection or a materialization of spiritual principle, both physically and spiritually. And somebody in here, I think, mentioned Enoch maybe once very quickly earlier. That story where Enoch is taken up in a chariot of what? Of fire, is that same principle. And collectively, what we're trying to do is
I'm
stop.
sorry.
I'm almost finished. And collectively, what we're trying to do is stop that death from occurring on a physical, material, social level. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Your pause is just, I thought you were finished. I'm sorry. But anyway. So in order to ascend, we have to put our ego in check first. Because most, and like you said, self-examine yourself, because most of the time our ego is in our way. We're in our own way. So once we get out of our own way, then we'll be able to ascend, climb Jacob's ladder, as we say, and go to the, I guess, go to the top or to, I don't want to say heaven, but, well, yeah. Am I right about that?
I believe so. I think that's correct. We do quote go to heaven. But as we talked about before, that is not some arbitrary location that you get sent to. It's not a cookie that you get. It's not a cookie you get for doing good or whatever. It is a realm of consciousness. It is a state of being. And there are many quote places to go within that state of being that you have access to that you did not have access to when you were not quote in heaven or that heavenly state. There are more things to do. So any other questions, comments related to what we've spoken about or anything related or not?
Good morning. This is George. When you were speaking about the matrix, I was reading, an article that spoke about the three spiritual teachings that may have been missed in the matrix. And it talked about, again, number one, that you can't go back to sleep. It's intelligence that we all, can reference. And at the same time, I think in terms of what the future holds, being able to understand the importance that our best intelligence is nature. But in this particular article, it talked about, you can't go back to sleep. It talks about there's nothing that you can do to make someone to take the red pill. But more importantly, the last one was you are operating under self-made rules. And I thought that, was something that, really resonated with me in terms of these rules that we live under, but at the same time being able to understand, what it says in reference to the Bible or the Gita or the Quran. And there's another a book, the Gavadan. I can't pronounce it, but anyway, it talks about the importance of the word is belief. And, again, I think, just looking at it in terms of the matrix, I think this is something that's profound, when we talk about today, not falling asleep or being aware, of intelligences. And so, again, I truly appreciate, the conversation because, again, there's pros and cons in terms of as we look at intelligences. And, there's, as I mentioned earlier, multiple intelligence. And when we talk about, the importance of instinctive intelligence, that's where, we tap into the soul and the spirit of who we are and not necessarily, being manipulated by self-made rules. So, I just, wanted to share those thoughts because I think that it's something that we need to reflect on when we talk about, our concept of being an autopilot when we talk about deep learning that refers to the spiritual versus the machinery learning when we talk about, again, the artificial intelligence of machines. So I just wanted to share those thoughts, but I know in the Matrix it did refer to that, and I just wanted to, maybe hear what your thoughts were.
George made a statement that you can't go back to sleep. Immediately my mind went to the idea of being woke and how there is such an attack on being woke, which means that it's an attack on being aware. How that relates to where release the way you say it, rather, with the understanding that the ones who are fighting being woke are the ones who do not understand the reality of what woke actually is. Would you look at that, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. So even that word woke is related to the opening of the eye and keeping your eyes open. That is a social cultural reflection of something that we are aware of internally that has a spiritual meaning. Be truly aware of the way in which you interface with other people and everything, and then do so in a non-egotistical way or an unselfish way. And of course, that term woke, once it is created and the true meaning is sort of watered down and taken to mean whatever, but the true meaning as it was is still instinctually known and known more directly by many people, has to do with just being aware of the true nature of our relationship to each other and to the world. While we are still in the process of figuring ourselves out, engaging the process of and the lessons of enlightenment and spiritual growth, it is possible to, quote, fall back asleep on an individual level and on a collective level. However, I do not believe we're going to do that on a collective level. Individually, it's all kind of variation, just as people are different. But after a certain, perhaps for lack of a better term, degree of attainment, then there is no going back to sleep. So like we talk about the number 7 as completeness or perfection. That is the point beyond which there is no sleep. There's no need for sleep. There is no sort of capacity to stumble, so to speak, and fall back asleep. If you catch my meaning. And that is sort of what we are all progressing towards as we engage this process of balancing, healing the self, and directing that inner fire, that inner desire upwards towards our higher nature, our spiritual sense of self.
Afternoon, Nick. If I can read something else, if that's okay at this time, in reference to the particular article on the 3 spiritual teachings of the Matrix. You know, it mentioned that if you ever undergone a spiritual awakening or a massive shift in consciousness in your lifetime, it says then it's apparent just how much newer meaning the things you observe take on. This is because our perceptions change and our view of the world tends to follow. And so when we speak on consciousness, when we talk about the 4 grades of consciousness, it talks about being unconscious. It also speaks about simple consciousness. And I think that where we are, you know, presently, you know, as far as self-consciousness, now we can see the importance of moving into the cosmic consciousness, you know, which basically, you know, refers, I guess, to, you know, dealing with the pineal gland or dealing with that aspect of tapping into, the spiritual transmutation in terms of the characteristics of cosmic consciousness. So, again, I think that there's stages of consciousness that, we are coming more into an awareness of, but when we could begin to obtain that cosmic consciousness, I think that it will just open up more, truths and spiritual meanings in terms of not only who we are, but the purpose of being able to function as we were created to as Elohim. So I just wanted, to share those thoughts, but there is those characteristics of cosmic consciousness that I think we should be aware of. I'm done. I just wanted to share those thoughts. Unless there's any
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to add to that if there are no questions or comments related to that. So yes, we are heading in that direction. When we talk about cosmic consciousness or the activation of the pineal gland or the opening of the single eye, that we are heading in that direction. And I don't mean to say that we don't already receive influence from those aspects of self. We do. All of the energy centers, all of the chakras, however they are described, are active and functioning as intended. However, I do not mean to diminish what it truly means to open the eye, to activate the pineal, because that has nothing to do with our mundane experience. That sits atop all of that in a sense. Our eyes, our eye is open and opening. It is not fully open. There is no mistaking that experience. And as I said, we are progressing towards that in terms of our general individual experience. And I mean for us here on this phone and on Zoom, the true sort of degree of attainment that represents is something much more than our sort of general anecdotal or general daily experience that may be influenced by that. If that makes sense. Collectively, we are progressing in that direction, but as I said, I don't mean to diminish what that is. When you have an experience where your pineal is open, where your inner eye is open and clear, there is no mistaking what is happening. It is not something you sort of vaguely feel the influence of. And throughout this process of enlightenment, engaging the self, etc., we are trying to increase the clarity with which we are able to feel the influence, with which we are able to hear the creator, so to speak, of course. But when the eye is opened, for real, it is not, there is no mistaking the experience. I had one such experience that I can recall very clearly. I think about it all the time. And it began as symbolically in a dream, a very intense dream. In the dream, I was doing some kind of mundane stuff. And then in the experience, I came across, it was an older man, and it was somewhere in Central America or something like that. So I'm assuming this older sort of Native American man from the Central American area was some sort of spiritual healer, shaman, etc. But he put a gun directly between my eyes and pulled the trigger. And this was in the experience, but in the dream, I mean, but it was not a regular dream experience. Let's say that. It felt like a sledgehammer hit me in the head. Physically felt like this. As I lay there in bed, asleep, quote unquote. Now I say that, but there was no pain associated with it. And that's kind of the best way I know how to describe it. The next instant, I was out of my body. So I present that as an example of what it means to truly have that eye opened. What we are doing is trying to get to the place where we even have the capacity to deal with that. And that is the process of enlightenment. The process of dealing with all the challenges and sort of inner things we recognize about ourselves. I have had experiences across the whole spectrum of what we've talked about, and that's some of where my ability to teach comes from. And those kinds of experiences you will also have as you continue to engage this process, as you learn how to meditate in all areas of your life. When I say all that to say, there are real, tangible, quote unquote, experiences to be had as a result of engaging this process that are not this sort of what we would consider difficult to hear, or they are not subtle. And it is about learning how to even have the capacity to remain in the state where the eye is open. And that takes a long time by design, because there are many steps within the self that must be recognized and engaged. Though that is not to say we can't have these kinds of experiences from time to time, and I'm sure we all have in some way. Anyway, thank you.
I think it sounds like you're describing. Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
yield. I yield.
Oh, it sounds like you're describing the process of waking up physically. If you've ever woken up very slowly and you kind of drift in and out of sleep before you're fully awake.
Yes, they say, as we all know, have heard, sleep is the cousin of death. What is death? Attempting to awake here is the process of overcoming death. And the sleep we do every single day is a reflection, a sort of a microcosm within the macrocosm of this principle.
Gotcha. Thank you.
The need for sleep is the need to refresh our connection to source, our energy that gives us life. When the eye is fully open, you don't need to sleep. What you experience in dreams are a reflection of the true experience of the full activation of the pineal, of the full awake state, where the eye is truly open. And that I sort of can't even imagine, though I sort of can based on some experiences that I have had. And that is not to say that you cannot have what we would consider miraculous things or sort of deep knowledge or insight that you hear, quote unquote, directly from your spirit. It's not to say you can't experience those things before the eye is open and remains open. I don't mean to say that, but the state wherein the eye is open and remains open is, for all intents and purposes of participating in this physical experience, that is the ultimate goal of needing to learn from all of this. It's not the stopping point, but it is the purpose of this process of learning. Yeah. I think that is a good place to stop. There might have been one more question? If not, then I'm good.
I have like a comment, maybe
Sure.
even a question, but when you described your dream, I mean, for a lot of people, depending on where your head and your heart are, that could have gone two ways, because you interpret it as an awakening. Other people may have interpreted it as something really negative. And then in the aftermath would then resist having it happen again. So I say that to say that we need to be careful in terms of how we interpret things, and to be able to look for the meanings that lead us to a higher level, as opposed to allowing things like that to create roadblocks and resistance for us.
I agree with that, Audrey. I think that's the reason the sages say that your dreams are how you interpret them. And you have a choice. And I think that the dream state and your interpretation is a clear way of understanding what free will is. So you have the freedom to interpret it as something negative and detrimental, something positive and productive. But we have been conditioned to see things as Nick saw in terms of his experience as being the devil doing something to us, or death is imminent, things like that, as opposed to understanding the positivity of it. And I also believe that if our desires are purely positive, if our lives are we seek rather to live our lives in a productive, positive frame and keep that mindset going, then we will have opportunity to see the meaning of those things in our lives, as well as others that we at one time thought were negative. So the dream state itself is a message, whether we recognize it or not. And one of the reasons when someone tells me they had a dream, I ask them, tell me immediately. Without thought, just tell me what you feel at that moment. And the reason is because what you feel at that moment is quite differently than what you will say about that encounter if you have the time to mull it over, because what you're actually doing is filtering it through all of the experiences, the religious experiences, the secular experiences that you've had in the past, as opposed to allowing it to interpret itself within you. And I think that's very important that we remember that. And I'm very much appreciative of you bringing that up, Audrey. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, if there are no more questions or comments, then we will resume tomorrow. But please don't hang up, because there's something I want you to say before you hang up, okay? Are there any other questions or comments? What I wanted to do is give you this number in the event that you cannot get on the other number, and do pass it on to others so that they will be able to get on. Currently, there are 18 people, so someone must have gotten on by continuously trying. That number is 646-931-3860. Again, 646-931-3860. So again, if the other number gives you a problem, then go to that number and see what happens. And I thank you for your presence. And Nick, thank you for your presentation. Thank all of you for your input verbally as well as your energetic presence. Have the rest of your day. I hope it's good for you, and I'll talk with you guys later.
I'm Richard. We dial the second number, or is this for the first number?
No, you can try the first number.
Okay.
If that number gives you the problem that it gave you today, then dial the other number, okay?
Okay. And you said last four numbers was what? 3860 or?
3860, 3860.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
No, thank
All
you.
right.
Anyone?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good day. Bye. Bye.
Bye.